Good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming out. It's wonderful to see you all. So I am going to talk about building interdisciplinary networks, and I very much feel like I am talking to the choir, to people who've been successful at this. I'm just going to share some of my experience and some of the things that I think are both challenges and opportunities. Excuse me. The first thing I would say is really recognize the power of homophily in terms of within departments and within our networks. We really tend to group together, and the conservative nature of the academy. So I'm going to talk about this from a university perspective and think a little bit about non-university organizations as well. But our departments are very much like-minded people who were trained together or trained in a similar fashion based on a discipline. So I would say, one, meet people where they're at and really be able to understand what does your department or what does your institution need or want from you. I think that fundamentally, developing networks takes tremendous amount of patience and persistence. I'm a public policy researcher, and when we talk about policy implementation, the baseline is usually a decade to see any kind of change. And so to think about a decade or a long period of time to really develop these networks and to be very open-minded to that. So there's not a cookbook where you'll see, oh, I've just baked my interdisciplinary network and it's ready. It very much takes time. I think that issue framing cannot really be understated. To really be ready to make the argument for the value of the kind of network you want to build for yourself, to make it internally and to also push that out. And think about it for funders, think about it for other kinds of organizations. Thank you. One thing that strikes me, and we actually talk about this a little bit at the University of Kansas, where our offices are often dictates who we talk to day to day. The kinds of meetings that we go to, our professional meetings, can often shape how our networks develop. So fundamentally, put yourself in a place, a physical place, to actually be open to different kinds of connections. So if you only go to meetings that are basically rooted in your discipline, you'll develop a disciplinary-based network. If you go to meetings and present your work to people who are of different stripes, you'll have a better chance of starting. I think of this as necessary but not necessarily sufficient to develop that network. But you've got to be out there thinking about different kinds of meetings where people are not like you in terms of their training. I think understanding the decision-making structure in your institution, whether that's a university, a nonprofit, or a government agency, knowing what you're rewarded for and how you're evaluated. So I very much actively identified an interdisciplinary network as a strength every year in my annual evaluation. Some years people bought it. It kind of depended on who was doing the evaluation. And other years people were like, well, but that means you're not doing things here. So navigating that with some ability to bring people with you, why it helps them if I'm successful in this interdisciplinary network, why it shines more brightly on my department, on my school. That has been, I think, a key to getting support so that I can maybe do less within my department but do more externally. I think developing the network too, I've always tried to think a little bit strategically about who could be in a university setting. Again, I realize that we're not all in university settings, but who can be my promotion and tenure reviewers? And so very early starting to talk to my colleagues that not everyone had to be a political science person, but in fact economists or sociologists or people who study public policy and decision making were fair game to look at my file, and that I could recommend them and they could indeed feel confident that those were people knowledgeable and well-positioned to evaluate my contribution. I would say it's not easy, which I think we all know. And the final thing that I would add is it can help if a funder actually holds your feet to the fire and makes you develop your interdisciplinary network. And so in grad school, the Environmental Protection Agency funded some of my work. And as part of that, they absolutely insisted, again, that I go to meetings with engineers and with toxicologists. And this, to me, was very enriching. I certainly know that that wasn't the case for some folks. Some folks found it very intimidating. So be open, put yourself in a place where you can interact with people, and recognize that I think a lot of forces really shape you to identify and interact with people who are more like you than not like you. So it's definitely got to be an effort that you think about strategically and understand the incentives in your organization. I'm going to wrap up now.
Thank you.
Thank you.